No one expected fireworks when the hearing began, not on a Tuesday afternoon with the cameras barely finding focus. But the second Jasmine Crockett and Ketanji Brown Jackson were seated across from each other, something in the air shifted. The topic was supposed to be judicial transparency and the erosion of public trust, but it didn't stay polite for long. Jasmine had arrived prepared, notes meticulously organized, her tone composed, her blue blazer immaculate. She knew her questions were going to make waves. What she didn't know was that Ketanji had come with a very different agenda. As the opening statements droned on, Ketanji leaned slightly toward her microphone. A few journalists caught the way her jaw clenched every time Jasmine's name was mentioned. Some assumed it was nerves. But the look in Ketanji's eyes was something closer to disdain. When Jasmine finally took her turn to speak, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Justice Jackson," she began evenly, "the American people deserve clarity about your financial disclosures. Especially when so many families in this country are wondering whether their sacrifices mean anything to those at the top." Before she could finish her thought, Ketanji's hand shot up. "Congresswoman Crockett," she interrupted, voice as smooth as polished glass, "you don't have the standing to lecture this court about sacrifices." The words hit the air like an electric shock. A hush fell over the room. The chairman cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Even the reporters froze, pens hovering midair. Jasmine didn't react, she just folded her hands calmly in front of her binder. But she felt her pulse begin to climb. "Justice Jackson," she continued, undeterred, "with respect, I'm here to ask questions on behalf of..." "On behalf of your own ambitions," Ketanji snapped, cutting her off for the second time. A rustle of disbelief traveled through the chamber. That was when Jasmine realized this wasn't going to be any ordinary exchange. This was going to be a test of who would blink first. By the time Ketanji interrupted her a third time, voice dripping with that same cold dismissal, the clip had already started spreading across social media. "Is this your version of accountability?" Ketanji asked, her eyebrows arched high. "Because it sounds a lot like grandstanding." Jasmine drew in a slow breath. She looked Ketanji straight in the eye. "No, Justice," she said. "Grandstanding is when you pretend transparency is beneath you." Even then, she didn't know that was only the beginning. The fourth interruption came before she could elaborate. "Your time is limited," Ketanji said icily. "And yet," Jasmine replied without flinching, "truth has no expiration date." For a moment, it seemed like Ketanji might lean back and let the exchange cool. But she didn't. Instead, she leveled her gaze at Jasmine and muttered something so sharp, so personal, that the entire hearing room shifted from tense to electric. "Some of us earned this seat with more than sound bites," Ketanji hissed, just loud enough for the microphones to catch. Jasmine's face remained perfectly still. But inside, a single thought began to burn. If she wanted a confrontation, she was about to get one. The chairman hesitated, glancing nervously between the two women. He looked like a man trying to remember the emergency exit route. But Jasmine didn't wait for anyone to save the moment. She leaned in just enough for her voice to carry to every microphone, her eyes locked on Ketanji's. "Justice Jackson," she said evenly, "you can question my methods all you want, but you don't get to question my commitment to the people who sent me here." A murmur traveled along the press row. Reporters' fingers flew across phone screens. Live captions were already describing the scene in real time. Jasmine Crockett responds to Ketanji's insult. Ketanji's lips curved into a faint, brittle smile. She adjusted her papers with a flick of her wrist, pretending not to care, but her knuckles had gone white where she gripped her pen. Then she cut Jasmine off for the fifth time. "You're out of your depth, Congresswoman." The words were so cold that even the stenographer paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. Jasmine didn't blink. "Maybe," she said softly, "but I'd rather be out of my depth than out of integrity." A few people in the gallery gasped. Ketanji's nostrils flared, just slightly. "Is that supposed to impress me?" she said. "Because it sounds like self-pity." 6. That was 6 interruptions. Jasmine pressed her palms against the table, gathering her breath. No, she replied. It's not supposed to impress you. It's supposed to remind you that the public isn't here to watch us trade insults. They're here to find out why this court's credibility is evaporating. At that, Ketanji leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Careful, she murmured. I've been doing this longer than you've been in public office. 7 interruptions. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her voice stayed calm, but a dangerous clarity had settled into her expression, like she'd decided she was done sparing anyone's pride. That's exactly the problem, she said. Some of you have been doing this so long you think accountability is optional. Silence spread across the chamber. Then, with a flick of her wrist, Ketanji gestured dismissively. Enough, she snapped. I won't dignify this grandstanding any further. 8. The chairman shifted in his seat again, looking like he might intervene. But before he could, Jasmine spoke, her voice steady and low. You don't have to dignify it, she said. You just have to answer the questions. Ketanji's mouth opened, but she didn't say anything for a heartbeat. Then she cut in again. 9. I will not sit here and be lectured by someone who doesn't understand judicial independence, she said. This time, Jasmine didn't immediately reply. She let the words hang in the air like smoke. She watched Ketanji, watched the irritation tightening the corners of her mouth. The whole country was watching now. Millions of viewers were refreshing their feeds, waiting to see who would blink first. And Jasmine had already decided. It wasn't going to be her. Ketanji shifted her papers again, a practiced motion meant to signal she was above the spectacle. But everyone could see the slight tremor in her hand. She was rattled, and Jasmine knew it. Justice Jackson, Jasmine began calmly, I've read every ruling you've signed for the last decade. I respect the weight of your position, but respect isn't the same as silence. Ketanji's eyes flicked up, her expression stony. Congresswoman, your questions are repetitive. They don't demonstrate an understanding of. 10. Jasmine didn't wait for her to finish. With all due respect, you've interrupted me 10 times in less than 15 minutes, she said, her voice growing stronger with every word. If that doesn't prove why Americans have lost faith in these institutions, I don't know what does. A ripple of quiet shock moved through the chamber. The chairman swallowed, glancing at the press box, as though wishing someone else would take over. Ketanji's voice went low and sharp. This isn't your courtroom, she snapped. This is a constitutional hearing. You will show proper deference. Jasmine tilted her head, studying her, her hands folded neatly over her binder. Deference, she repeated. Deference is earned, Justice. And it's earned through transparency, not intimidation. The tension climbed another notch, the kind of atmosphere that makes even seasoned reporters hold their breath. And then, Ketanji made the mistake Jasmine would later call the moment she crossed the line for good. You can recite your talking points all day, Ketanji said, voice dripping disdain. But at the end of it, you're still a first-term congresswoman who doesn't understand how this system works. 11. That was it. A hush so deep fell over the room that the hum of the fluorescent lights felt deafening. Jasmine's jaw tightened, just a fraction, before she lifted her gaze, her voice suddenly low and quiet in a way that carried farther than any shout. You're right, she said evenly. I am a first-term congresswoman. I wasn't born into this system. I didn't grow up believing I was entitled to a seat at this table. She paused, her eyes locking with Ketanji's. But don't confuse my newness with weakness, she continued, her voice like tempered steel. Because the difference between us isn't experience, it's conviction. I don't use my title to shield me from the consequences of my choices. And I don't expect the public to respect me while I hide behind procedure. It was so quiet you could hear a reporter's pen clatter to the floor. Ketanji's lips parted, but no words came out. Jasmine let the silence expand, filling every inch of the chamber. She didn't look away. She didn't lower her voice. And for the first time all afternoon, Ketanji Brown Jackson didn't interrupt her. The chairman shifted in his seat, clearly relieved anyone, had finally stopped talking over Jasmine. But the relief didn't last long. The room was holding its collective breath, waiting to see if Ketanji would recover her composure and fire back. But Jasmine wasn't done. "Justice Jackson," she said, her voice steady as polished glass, "you just demonstrated exactly why so many Americans have stopped trusting their institutions. Because when the questions get uncomfortable, the powerful interrupt, belittle, and deflect." Ketanji's jaw tensed, her gaze locked forward. She was still holding her pen so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. Jasmine kept going, her tone calm but edged with something electric. "I didn't come here to be talked over 11 times, she said. "I came here to ask why the rules keep bending for the people with the right connections, and why accountability is treated like an insult instead of a duty." A murmur swept the gallery. Reporters were typing so fast their keyboards sounded like hail. Ketanji finally spoke, her voice lower now, almost measured, but her eyes were hard. "Congresswoman Crockett, you have no idea how much responsibility sits on these shoulders," she said. "You don't know what it takes to protect the balance of." Jasmine didn't flinch. "No," she said. "But I do know what it looks like when that responsibility is used as a shield. I've watched it happen my entire career, people in power making decisions behind closed doors, then expecting the rest of us to bow our heads and say thank you." Her voice was growing steadier, resonating like a struck bell. "That's not respect," she continued. "That's entitlement." The words landed so heavily the chairman's gavel hovered midair, as if he couldn't decide whether to bang it or just sit and watch. Ketanji exhaled, her jaw flexing. "This hearing is not the place for personal grievances," she said. Jasmine didn't even blink. "Then perhaps," she said, "you should stop making it personal." Another hush fell over the chamber. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the precise moment Ketanji's eyes shifted, just a flicker, but enough to show the impact had landed. And Jasmine wasn't done. 11 interruptions, she said softly. 11. And still, you couldn't silence the questions. At that, Ketanji finally looked away, her gaze dropping to the polished table. And in that instant, everyone watching, here in this echoing chamber and on millions of screens across the country, understood that Jasmine Crockett hadn't just survived the confrontation. She had won it. Outside the hearing room, the clip was already spreading like wildfire. News channels broke into scheduled coverage with flashing banners. "Breaking, Jasmine Crockett confronts Justice Jackson over accountability, 11 interruptions documented live." In living rooms and break rooms, people were replaying the moment Jasmine spoke those last quiet words. 11 interruptions. And still, you couldn't silence the questions. Inside, the chairman tried to clear his throat and reassert some semblance of order. Let's return to the agenda," he stammered. But no one moved. Ketanji straightened her notes again, but this time her hands were steady only because she was willing them not to shake. She looked up, and for a second, her composure cracked. You could see it, the realization that she had miscalculated, that she'd underestimated what it meant to dismiss someone like Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine saw it too. And she didn't look triumphant. She looked resolute. "Justice Jackson," she said, her voice softer now, "I don't question your intellect. I question your willingness to be questioned." Ketanji opened her mouth, closed it again. "The people who elected me," Jasmine went on, "don't have the luxury of ignoring hard truths. They don't get to call for deference when their lives fall apart because of decisions made in rooms like this." A staffer in the back whispered, "God, she's not letting go." And she wasn't. Because Jasmine knew that if she yielded now, every future hearing would become a blueprint for how to shut her down. "I will finish my questions," Jasmine said simply. The chairman hesitated, then nodded, almost grateful she'd taken control of the moment for him. "Proceed," he said. Jasmine drew a single page from her binder, an ethics report that had been ignored for nearly a year. She laid it flat on the table so everyone could see the highlighted sections. "This document outlines concerns that have been raised repeatedly about undisclosed conflicts," she said, her tone measured. "I'm going to read them into the record." Ketanji leaned back in her chair. The fight had gone out of her posture, replaced by something quieter, a defensive stillness that looked like someone calculating how much more damage this moment would do. Reporters in the gallery were texting their editors, their faces lit by phone screens. And Jasmine began to read. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She just spoke, sentence by sentence, with the unshakable calm of someone who refused to be interrupted again. And in that silence, the country watched a new kind of power take shape, not the power to intimidate or belittle, but the power to stand firm, even when someone tried 11 times to break you. By the time Jasmine reached the end of the document, the atmosphere felt almost surreal. Like everyone was aware they were witnessing something historic, even if they didn't have words for it yet. She looked up from the final paragraph and let the silence linger, forcing every person in the chamber to sit with the gravity of what had just been read into the record. Ketanji stared down at her own copy, expression tight, as if hoping the table itself might swallow her. She had spent her entire career commanding rooms with her intellect and her presence. But in this moment, her authority was no longer unquestioned. Jasmine carefully set the paper aside. "For years," she said evenly, "we've been told that accountability undermines faith in institutions. But the opposite is true. Secrecy undermines faith. Entitlement undermines faith." A reporter near the aisle leaned forward, her eyes wide. She mouthed to her colleague, "She's still going." Jasmine met Ketanji's gaze one last time. "And the reason I will not apologize for pressing you today," she continued, "is because when people look at this hearing, I want them to see that no title, no robe, puts you above questions." Ketanji shifted, the first signs of exasperation surfacing in the tightness around her mouth. "This is bordering on a lecture," she said sharply. Jasmine didn't blink. "Call it what you like," she replied. "I call it my job." A burst of applause started in the back, spontaneous and unsanctioned. The chairman rapped his gavel, flustered, but even he couldn't quite hide the note of respect in his voice when he spoke. "Order," he said. "Order. Congresswoman Crockett, please proceed to your closing statement." Jasmine nodded once, calmly, and closed her binder with a soft snap. "I have nothing further to add," she said. "My questions were clear. The record is clear." She leaned back in her chair, folded her hands in her lap, and looked straight ahead as if to say, "Your move." Ketanji opened her mouth, closed it again. For the first time all day, she had nothing left to say. In newsrooms across America, producers were cutting together clips of the exchange. Every Chiron read some version of the same thing. Jasmine Crockett confronts Justice Jackson, and doesn't back down. But here in this wood-paneled hearing room, where power usually flowed only in one direction, something had shifted. No one would forget how it felt to watch a woman refuse to be interrupted, no matter how many times it happened. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the tall windows as if the building itself was trying to exhale. Inside, no one moved. Even the aides along the walls looked like they were holding their breath. The chairman glanced around nervously before clearing his throat. "Justice Jackson," he began, "would you care to respond?" Ketanji adjusted her microphone with deliberate slowness. For the first time that day, she seemed to weigh her words instead of delivering them like a verdict. She paused, inhaled, her voice losing some of the icy edge. "I appreciate the Congresswoman's perspective," she said finally, each syllable careful, controlled. "I still disagree with the premise of some of her questions." Her gaze shifted downward, fingers drumming against the polished wood. "But I acknowledge," she continued, "that trust is built not only by the decisions we make but by our willingness to explain them. It wasn't an apology. Not even close. But it was as close to an admission of vulnerability as anyone had ever heard from her. Jasmine didn't smile or soften. She simply inclined her head, as if to say, "That's all I needed you to say." From the back row, a young black woman in a charcoal suit, an intern, barely out of college, felt tears prick at her eyes. She didn't cry, but she would later describe that moment to her mother on the phone, voice shaking with something like hope. "I've never seen anyone talk to power like that," she whispered. Across the gallery, an older journalist who'd been covering Washington for 30 years wrote a single sentence in her notes. "Crockett just changed the rules." The chairman cleared his throat again, but it was unnecessary. The hearing had already ended in everything but formality. The story was written, the narrative set, a first-term Congresswoman standing her ground against a Supreme Court justice who thought a title could excuse condescension. As the room began to empty, Ketanji remained seated for a moment, staring down at the papers she'd spent hours preparing. She looked like she was trying to figure out when the ground had shifted under her feet, and how she'd failed to see it coming. Jasmine stood, gathering her binder with slow, deliberate movements. She didn't look triumphant. She looked like a woman who'd simply done what needed to be done, no matter how many times she was interrupted. When she turned to leave, the hush followed her out, an invisible acknowledgement that in a single afternoon, she'd proven something a lot of people had long suspected. You can be underestimated 11 times. But it only takes one moment of clarity to change the conversation forever. Down the long hallway, reporters rushed past each other, shouting into their phones, trying to be the first to break a headline that was already echoing everywhere. Congresswoman Crockett refused to yield. 11 interruptions on the record. She dismantled the tone of entitlement piece by piece. Jasmine walked with her shoulders squared, binder clutched against her side. She didn't look left or right, didn't pause for the swarm of cameras or the flood of questions being hurled in her direction. "Congresswoman, was it personal?" someone called out. "Did you plan to confront her this directly?" another shouted. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. A young producer trailed behind, whispering urgently into her headset. "She's trending. Jasmine Crockett is literally the top story on every platform. We need a clip for the evening broadcast." But Jasmine didn't slow down until she reached a side corridor, tucked away from the chaos. There, she finally exhaled. One of her staffers, a wiry man in his early 30s with a perpetually anxious expression, caught up to her, tablet in hand. "Ma'am," he panted, "you're getting thousands of messages. Emails. Voicemails. People are calling this," he swallowed, a little breathless. "They're calling it a moment of reckoning." She didn't reply at first. Instead, she closed her eyes, just for a heartbeat, letting the adrenaline ebb out of her system. When she looked at him again, her voice was quiet but steady. "This was never about me," she said. "It's about what happens when people finally decide they won't be talked over anymore." He nodded, but she could tell he didn't fully grasp it yet. Most people wouldn't. This wasn't just about one hearing or one viral clip. It was about the message those 11 interruptions had sent to everyone who'd ever been told to stay in their place, to wait their turn, to swallow their questions. It was about proving that no matter how many times you're cut off, your voice still matters. A few feet away, a camera crew hesitated at the mouth of the hallway, unsure if they should approach. Jasmine met their eyes and gave a single nod. They stepped forward, rolling tape. And in that moment, without any script or pretense, she knew exactly what she was going to say. The camera light clicked on, a small red eye that meant her words were about to be broadcast into millions of homes. The reporter held out a microphone, her voice trembling just slightly as she asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Congresswoman Crockett, how do you respond to critics who say your tone was disrespectful to the court?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "I think," she began calmly, "that Americans are tired of confusing civility with complacency." She let that settle. They're tired of watching powerful people shield themselves behind protocol while families wonder why justice feels so selective. Her voice stayed soft, but there was a current running beneath it, something fierce, something unbothered by the predictable outrage already brewing in op-eds and comment sections. I respect Justice Jackson's career, she continued, but respect does not require silence. And today, I chose not to be silent. The reporter swallowed, nodding. And, if you had it to do over again, she asked. Jasmine's eyes didn't waver. I'd do exactly the same thing, she said. Because sometimes the most respectful thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it makes people uncomfortable. Behind her, a tall window framed the city skyline, buildings glowing in the late afternoon light, a reminder that while institutions could feel unshakable, they were all built by people who made choices. And choices could change. She turned slightly, directing her last words not just to the reporter but to everyone watching, everyone who'd ever wondered if speaking up was worth the risk. If there's one thing I hope folks take from today, she said, it's that you don't have to wait for permission to stand your ground. Her voice was so clear it felt almost intimate, like she was speaking directly to whoever needed to hear it most. You don't have to apologize for demanding answers. You don't have to shrink to make someone else comfortable. The camera kept rolling, but she was finished. Jasmine stepped away, leaving the reporter standing there, blinking into the lens as though she couldn't quite process what had just happened. And in living rooms across America, people who had never heard Jasmine Crockett's name before whispered the same 3 words. She didn't flinch. By the time Jasmine left the building, the crowd outside had doubled. Reporters were still filing live updates, and social media was already ablaze with hashtags. Hashtag 11 interruptions. Hashtag she didn't flinch. Hashtag Crockett vs. Jackson. A young woman in a denim jacket, maybe 19, maybe 20, stood by the barricade, holding up her phone to record. When Jasmine passed, she lowered it just long enough to say, her voice shaking, "Thank you for not backing down." Jasmine paused, just for a moment. "Don't ever let anyone tell you your questions don't matter," she said quietly. The girl's eyes filled, and she nodded. Around them, the city hummed on, traffic horns, overheard arguments, the ordinary noise of a place too busy to notice a single hearing. But Jasmine knew this moment would last far beyond the news cycle. This wasn't about her name trending. It was about what those hours in that wood-paneled room had proven. That no robe, no title, no carefully rehearsed condescension could erase the right to be heard. As she reached her car, her chief of staff caught up to her, breathless. "Ma'am, just so you know, every network wants you on tonight," he said, waving a phone with a dozen missed calls. Jasmine set her binder on the seat and looked out at the dusk settling over the Capitol dome. "Tell them I'll think about it," she said. "Tonight, I'd rather call my mother." He blinked, surprised. "Your mother?" Jasmine smiled, small, tired, but real. "She always taught me," she said, "that speaking the truth doesn't have to come with a performance." The engine started with a soft rumble. And as she drove away, the building behind her already receding into shadow, she knew this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. Because no matter how many times they tried to silence her, she had shown the country exactly what she was made of. And millions had heard her loud and clear. Today wasn't about winning an argument or landing a headline. It was about something far bigger, reminding every person watching that your voice matters, even when the powerful pretend it doesn't. Jasmine Crockett didn't come here to be polite. She came here to ask the questions so many of us have been shouting at our screens, waiting for someone in that room to finally say out loud. When Justice Jackson interrupted her 11 times, Jasmine stood her ground 11 times. And on the 12th, she made it clear that no amount of rank or reputation can erase accountability. This moment is a lesson for all of us. You don't need permission to demand honesty. You don't have to shrink to keep someone else comfortable. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, or braver, or just a little less alone, share it. Because the truth deserves to be heard, and the people willing to speak it deserve to be backed up. And remember, no matter how many times they try to cut you off, you still get the last word. Thanks for watching. Stay strong. Stay loud. And never forget, you belong in every room where decisions are made.